Welcome back to class. This is Aode 4R70W class, Part 2, Lesson 4. Our goals for this lesson are reassembly of the reverse clutch drum and the pump. Get the reverse clutch drum from the parts bench. If you'll recall, we placed it here loosely assembled for cleaning with the intermediate one-way clutch and the piston, apply ring, Belleville return spring, and snap ring. Also get the clutch friction, steel, and end plates, as well as the snap ring and this thrust bearing. Get the old square cut reverse piston seals. We finished assembling the forward clutch drum in Lesson 3. Set it to the side like so. This thrust bearing goes between the forward and reverse drums. Apply transmission fluid to it. Set it onto the forward drum with this lip facing upward. There is a snap ring here which must be removed. It fastens, depending on model, a one-way clutch or, as you see here, a mechanical diode. It's not uncommon to find this snap ring spread, damaged, and in some cases not even in its groove on the drum. This one is damaged and barely in the groove. Regardless of the condition of this snap ring in your transmission, never reuse it. We will replace it later using a unique spiral retaining ring system included in the SureCure kit. Use snap ring pliers if you have to remove it. Set the roller clutch assembly or mechanical diode aside. Turn the drum over. Remove the loosely assembled parts. Take the thick, wavy snap ring out. Lift out the Belleville type return spring. Remove the apply ring. Finally, lift out the piston. At this point, you should have taken this drum apart 3 times. Once during teardown, again for cleaning, and finally now for reassembly. Check the drum one last time for any damage. Even though there is some discoloration from a slipping band, a ruler indicates this one is straight and not warped from heat damage. If yours is distorted, you'll need a new drum. This surface turns against the plastic thrust washer and must be completely smooth. If it's beat up and gouged from a snap ring which came out of this groove, the drum will have to be replaced. Also note, if you must replace it, there are two different versions of the reverse drum. One for a roller clutch assembly and another which accepts a mechanical diode. They are not interchangeable. Reassembly of the drum begins with locating the seals for the piston. The seals for the reverse piston are a square cut type. Here they are. Install them into the grooves in the piston. Use transmission fluid or transgel to lubricate the inner and outer bore surfaces in the drum. Set the piston into the drum. Unlike the lip seals used on other pistons in this transmission, the square cut seals rely on a tight interference fit in order to seal. You will have to force the piston down into the bore with a large screwdriver. Work it in by pushing on one side and then the other. It will finally bottom out in the drum. Put the apply ring into the circular groove in the piston. Inspect the Belleville return spring again. Make sure that it has no cracks and is not broken. It should look as you see here. If you see a separation, it is broken and should be replaced with a new one. Set it into the drum with the inner fingers pointing downward. Installation of this thick, very wavy snap ring is next. Of all the snap rings in the transmission, this one is the most difficult to install. You'll be pressing down very hard to get the ring into its groove, and you must wear gloves in case your hands or the screwdriver should slip. Make sure the ring is seated completely into the groove. Get the apply plate next. It's easy to identify. It has a rounded raised rib on one side which contacts the Belleville spring. The side which contacts a friction plate should be smooth and flat. Set it in like so. The friction and steel plates go in next. The old ones, while not ruined, are showing signs of slippage and high temperature damage. Let's get new ones. Get the remaining forward and reverse type friction and steel plates from the kit. Pre-soak them in fluid. Even though there were 4 friction and 3 steel plates remaining in the overhaul kit, our transmission model requires only 3 friction and 2 steel plates. The next plate to go into the drum after the apply plate is a friction plate. Now add a steel plate. Add a friction. Add one more steel plate. Finally, place the 3rd friction plate in. Install the end plate next. Notice that it is flat on one side and is stepped for reinforcement on the other. Place it into the drum with the flat side down against the last friction plate. Install the snap ring. The end play for the reverse clutch should be from 40 to 58 thousandths of an inch. Measure it by using a combination of feeler gauge blades as we did with the other drums. I measure 52 thousandths, which is fine. Turn the drum over. The installation of the intermediate one-way clutch is next. There are 2 types you may encounter depending on model. One type, as you see here, is called a mechanical diode and is used on later 4R70Ws and all 4R70Es. Place it onto the drum with this side facing downward. Add fluid to it. You cannot disassemble a mechanical diode for internal inspection, but you can determine its health by sound and action. It should freewheel with a clicking sound when rotated counterclockwise. It should lock when you attempt to turn it clockwise. The other type of one-way clutch, if you are working on an Aode or early 4R70W, consists of a caged roller and spring assembly as well as an outer race and retaining plate. Inspect all of those components carefully, especially the accordion springs. If any of them are broken, there is a new roller and spring package available. After reassembly, this style one-way clutch should freewheel in the counterclockwise direction and lock in the other direction. There is a problem with the original snap ring, which fastens the one-way clutch to the drum. The very abrupt stopping of the drum during the shift from first to second gear causes it to spread and eventually come out of the groove, ruining the plastic thrust washer on the pump and gouging the drum. Simply replacing the snap ring with a new one is not a long-term solution. There is a fix for this in the SureCure kit. There is a two-piece retaining system included in the kit which consists of a spiral ring and a locking ring. Set the locking ring onto the drum with the outer lip facing upward. Roll the spiral ring around and into the groove. Finally, according to the instructions, use a large flathead screwdriver and hammer to stake the locking ring in 6 places around the outside. Set the reverse drum assembly onto the forward drum. Let's move on and work on the pump. Get the loosely assembled pump along with the old intermediate piston lip seals. Set the plastic thrust washer aside. Remove the 5 stator support to pump body bolts. Lift the stator support up, out, and set it aside. Lift out the inner and outer pump rotors. Note that one side of the inner rotor, which turns against the stator support, is completely flat across its surface, while the other side, which faces the front of the pump, has a chamfered area to help guide the torque converter hub in. Set them down as removed together. Removal of the front seal is next. With the pump apart, it's easy to force the seal out from behind. Use a medium screwdriver, put the tip inside the lip, and knock it out with a hammer. This metal-clad front seal is held in place in the pump in a very unique way. There is a slightly raised rib here, which, when installed into this bore, is grappled and retained by a sharp barbed recessed area here. Interestingly, you only need thumb pressure to install it. I'll show you in a minute, but let's look at the pump bushing first. The torque converter hub is supported by this bushing. This one is very smooth, shiny, and looks like new. There is no unusual wear, such as gouging, deep grooving, or evidence of off-center side wear. If the bushing in your pump looks this healthy, leave it as is. If yours has signs of wear or you are unsure of its condition, replace it with a new one. Even though this bushing is in excellent shape, I'll show you how to replace it. Use a large screwdriver and hammer to drive it out, but before you do, take notice of how it is positioned. This bushing has 2 notches which should be oriented a certain way. Use a felt tip marker to indicate where the notches should go. Also note that the notches are closer together on the left side when viewed this way. Let's take it to another work area so we won't disturb these parts. Now drive the old bushing out. Use light blows to minimize damage to it. Turn the body over. Get the new bushing. Always install the new bushing from the front seal side. Align the notches with the pin marks. Use an engine valve, bushing driver, or even a large socket and drive it in. Installed completely, it should be flush with this ledge. The bushing should be staked here and here. I made a tool from a stubby screwdriver. The tip is cut down to 1/8 of an inch wide. Take the pump body to your torque converter and test fit it. Set it onto the converter hub. Make sure it turns freely. If it is too tight, knock down high spots on the bushing by tapping with a hammer and wood. Never directly hammer the soft aluminum with a steel tool. Installation of the front seal is next. Put fluid onto the seal and pump. Push it in with your thumbs. To make sure it is completely seated, I like to tap it a couple of times with a hammer. Turn the body over. Put some fluid into the rotor cavity. Apply fluid to the outer rotor and place it in. Add some to the inner rotor. Make sure that you install it with the chamfered side down into the cavity facing the front seal and center it with the bushing. Now set the stator support into the body. The bolt holes align one way. Install the bolts finger tight. Finally tighten them to 200 inch-pounds or 23 Newton meters. Installation of the intermediate piston into the pump body is next. Get the new inner and outer lip seals for the piston. Here they are. We'll also need the sealing ring subkit in a few minutes. Lubricate the seals and bore with fluid or transgel. Set the piston onto the pump body and work the seals in with a feeler gauge. As with the other lip seals, work slowly and carefully to avoid cutting the seals. Take all the time you need to do this. This is actually how long it takes me to get this piston in. After the piston bottoms out in its bore, reinstall the return spring cage by aligning the 9 springs with their holes in the piston and snapping it into place. Make sure each of the 3 tabs anchors like so. The last task in this lesson is to put new sealing rings onto the input shaft here for the converter clutch apply circuit and also onto the stator support here for the reverse drum and here for the forward clutch. We'll begin with the seals on the input shaft. These rings are solid. Cut them off with a razor blade. According to the SureCure kit instructions, they should be replaced with these supplied in the kit. As we did with the solid direct clutch rings in lesson 3, expand the rings a small amount with your fingers and install them into the grooves. Compress them as much as possible with your fingers. Remove the forward and reverse clutch sealing rings. These are metal rings which hook together for a zero end gap seal. To unhook and remove them, pinch one end against the support while pulling out on the other. Be careful, they have sharp edges and can cut your fingers. Get the new sealing rings from the overhaul package. Get the two largest diameter rings. These go here for the reverse drum. The slightly smaller diameter rings in the sub-kit would normally be installed here for the forward clutch. The instructions with the SureCure kit instead recommend using the Teflon solid rings supplied in the kit. Before we install them into their grooves, let's carefully test fit the input drum and shaft into the pump to resize the nylon rings here. Put some transmission fluid on the rings and here on this radius where the seals will be guided in. The seals for the torque converter clutch are now sized to the perfect diameter. If you cut or damage these seals, try again by using the ones in the overhaul package sub-kit. They are identical to the ones which come in the SureCure kit. Work the Teflon seals for the forward clutch into their grooves. Put fluid on the rings and the drum bore. Carefully guide the forward clutch onto the pump to resize the rings. Compress them as hard as you can. If it won't go yet, don't force it. Compress the rings more. This step is tedious and does take time and patience. Use the blunt end of a feeler gauge blade to push the seal in. Work slowly. I'm not editing out how long it takes me to do this. Now separate them. The solid rings for the forward clutch have now been compressed to the proper diameter. These rings can be a little difficult to install even for experienced technicians. The SureCure kit recommends this type of ring for an ultra low loss seal. However, the new hook type metal rings supplied in the overhaul package work great too. If you cut or damage these Teflon seals while attempting to install them, don't hesitate to substitute the new metal ones. They are much easier to install, and I think they seal just as well as the Teflon ones. We can check the forward and reverse clutch packs by directing shop air into the ports here and here. Replace the plastic pump to reverse drum thrust washer. Add some transgel to it. The tab locates it one way into this notch on the pump. Put some fluid on the sealing rings and the bushing journals here and here. Set the reverse drum onto the pump. Use a rubber tip blowgun and apply about 45 psi air to this port. It's working correctly, and I hear only a slight amount of air leakage. This clutch will work fine. Set the thrust bearing into the clutch drum with the lip facing downward. Now install the forward clutch drum. Rotate it back and forth until it engages all three reverse friction plates and contacts the thrust bearing. Apply air pressure to this port. The forward clutch air checks great. If you hear a lot of leakage, find out why. The most likely reason will be that it is not all the way down against the thrust bearing, allowing air to leak past the sealing ring on the pump. Do not apply air to this port for the intermediate clutch piston. It will blow it out and possibly damage the return spring cage. Except for the pump to case O-ring, which we will install later, the forward and reverse clutch drums, along with the pump, are ready to install later. At this point, turn them over and return them assembled as a group to the parts bench. This concludes Part 2, Lesson 4. Join me in Lesson 5 and we'll begin assembling the transmission drivetrain into the case.